It's 2010 and someone asks you, who's the best point guard in the NBA? You may say Chris Paul, the point guard, perennial all-star, future Hall of Famer, considered by many as a top 5 point guard all time. But if you ask me then, CP3 wasn't even the best point guard in his draft class. For the first few years of their careers, he was neck and neck with Deron Williams. We don't have those conversations anymore as their legacies have gone in different directions. But how do we get here? Let's talk about what happened to Deron Williams. Deron was born on June 26, 1984 in Parkersburg, West Virginia. He and his family moved to Texas when he was 4 years old. Although he'd go on to be an NBA All-Star, he could have wrestled at an elite level. He won 2 state championships in his childhood. But even with his wrestling success, his sights were always set on his first love, basketball. In 5th grade, he told his teacher that he wanted to be an NBA All-Star. Deron was a bit of a late bloomer. He struggled to find an AAU team to join during his middle school days. While being in the AAU circuit helps put young prospects on the map, Deron's mom actually helped him focus on the fundamentals of playing point guard. His mom was a college player at West Liberty State College. She would tell him to set his teammates up and not ball hog. And according to Deron, she'd even get mad if he scored 25 points in a game. Deron played high school ball at the Colony High School in the Colony, Texas. There, he'd highlight his elite point guard skills during his junior and senior years, averaging 17 points per game and 9 assists per game as a junior, and 17.5 points per game and 8.5 assists per game his senior year. His play led to a lot of winning too. His team made deep playoff runs in the Texas Class 5A state playoffs, losing both times in the semifinals. Deron was also being recognized on a national level. He was listed as a 4-star recruit, and his college choices came down to 4 schools: Georgia Tech, Tennessee, Maryland, and Illinois. His top 4 options would quickly dwindle down to 1. All of his college visits were initially halted due to the 9/11 attack, but the week of Deron's visit to Tennessee, CJ Watson committed. On the same day of Deron's visit to Georgia Tech, Jarrett Jack committed. When it was time to visit Maryland, he was told that head coach Gary Williams wouldn't be there. Plus, Steve Blake was a starting point guard, and Deron would be relegated to the bench for at least his freshman year. That left 1, Illinois. D. Brown had just committed, but he was recruiting Deron heavily. Although D was much smaller and played point guard as well in high school, he was more of a scoring guard and reassured Deron that he'd be the point guard, and the two of them would mesh well together on the court. So Deron committed to Illinois. His freshman year was a struggle. Just 1 week into summer school at Illinois, he found out that his then girlfriend was pregnant. Plus, he was homesick, going from Texas to the cold and snowy weather in Champaign, Illinois. And on the court, he wasn't seeing the production either. He averaged just over 6 points a game and 4.5 assists per game. To cap it all off, head coach Bill Self left to take the head coach job at Kansas. Deron was ready to pack it up and transfer. Fortunately, he was convinced to stay. In came Bruce Weber. He installed a motion offense and he let Deron be a true floor general. His sophomore year, Deron averaged 14 points per game and 6 assists per game. Even with the huge jump in production, Deron wasn't on the draft boards going into his junior year. His play during his junior year and Illinois' domination changed all that. Led by their dominant big 3 of Deron, D. Brown, and Luther Head, Illinois will go on to a 37-2 record, even starting the season 29-0. Deron averaged 12.5 points and almost 7 assists per game, but his performance in the NCAA tournament catapulted him all the way up the draft boards. He averaged almost 15 points per game and 8 assists per game in 6 NCAA tournament games. His signature game came in the Elite 8 against Arizona, where he had 22 points, 8 assists, and made numerous huge plays to help Illinois overcome a 14-point deficit in the second half and eventually win that game in overtime. Illinois made it to the national championship where they lost to North Carolina, but by the end of the season, Deron was projected to be a top 5 pick, so he declared for the NBA draft. Even with his NCAA tournament play, Deron was still behind rival point guard Chris Paul on many draft boards. He ended up having pre-draft workouts with the Atlanta Hawks, Utah Jazz, Orlando Magic, and Charlotte Bobcats. Deron agreed to each workout, only if Chris Paul was there too. And that decision, that confidence, it paid off. Deron was drafted number 3 overall to the Jazz, while Chris Paul went number 4 overall to the New Orleans Hornets. Even as a top draft pick and the expectation to be the point guard of the future, it wasn't going to be given to him immediately. Utah was coached by the legendary Jerry Sloan, a hard-nosed, old-school coach who led the franchise to back-to-back NBA Finals appearances in 1997 and 1998. Deron started his rookie season coming off the bench. Just 9 games into the season, he moved into the starting lineup because starting point guard Keith McLeod was out. After 19 starts, Deron went back to the bench. Going back to the bench had to be frustrating for Deron. He was the 3rd overall pick, but he was backing up Keith McLeod and Milt Palacio, 2 players that Deron was simply better than, even as a rookie. Although he was the point guard of the future, Sloan wanted him to earn it. And Deron earned that starting spot full-time after the All-Star break. He finished his rookie season averaging almost 11 points per game and 4.5 assists per game. The Jazz finished 41-41 and missed the playoffs. Deron's second season would start his escalation to becoming elite. He averaged 16 points per game and almost 9.5 assists per game, leading the Jazz to a 51-31 record. They beat the Houston Rockets in Game 7 of the first round of the playoffs. Then they beat the We Believe Golden State Warriors in 5 games, creating a Western Conference Finals matchup with the San Antonio Spurs. It was this series that really put the league on notice. Known for their elite defense, the Spurs had no answer for Deron. Not even 8-time All-NBA defensive team and elite perimeter defender, Bruce Bowen. The Jazz would go on to lose the series in 5 games, and the Spurs would sweep the Cleveland Cavaliers to win the NBA Finals. Although his team lost, there was no question. Deron Williams had arrived. In the Western Conference Finals, Deron averaged almost 26 points per game, 8 assists per game, and 2.5 steals per game in the series. Over the next 3 seasons, Deron followed that stellar playoff run up by averaging almost 19 points per game and 10.5 assists per game, leading his team to playoff appearances in all 3 seasons. In those 3 playoff appearances, he upped his game even more, averaging 22 points per game and almost 10.5 assists per game on 45% shooting from the field and just under 42% from 3. Deron also won his first gold medal playing for Team USA in the 2008 Olympics and was named to his first NBA All-Star team in 2010. He had become a monster, a point guard with shades of Gary Payton, Jason Kidd, and even Allen Iverson, all guys that Deron says he modeled his game after. He became famous for his double crossover and hezzy crossover, keeping defenders on skates and scoring from anywhere on the floor. Along with his vision and decision-making with the ball, he quickly grew into one of the best point guards in the league. The 10-11 season would serve as a beginning of a turning point for Deron. Although Deron continued his ascension as an elite player, the Jazz couldn't quite take that next step as a team to become a legitimate championship contender. In the 07-08 season, the Jazz finished 4th in the West with a 54-28 record, but lost in 6 games to the LA Lakers in the second round of the playoffs. In the 08-09 season, the Jazz were 8th in the West at 48-34 and lost in 5 games to the Lakers in the first round of the playoffs. And in the 09-10 season, they were 5th in the West at 53-29 and got swept by, you guessed it, the Lakers in the second round of the playoffs. By the 10-11 season, Deron's supporting cast in Utah was much different. Guys like Carlos Boozer, Matt Harpring, Derek Fisher, Ronnie Brewer, and Kyle Korver were out, and Al Jefferson, Raja Bell, and then rookie Gordon Hayward were in. The Jazz were a disappointing 31-23 heading into the All-Star break. Then came the breaking point. The Jazz were playing the Chicago Bulls when Jerry Sloan called a play for Al Jefferson on the left low post block. Deron, knowing that Al liked to go to work from the right low post block, decided to flip the play to get Al the ball on the right side. Al scored, so you'd figure this be no big deal, right? Wrong. The tension between the star point guard and the head coach over play calling and on-court leadership blew up in the locker room at halftime. According to then Jazz owner Greg Miller, Sloan told Williams, "If you're going to change the play, can you at least let your teammates know?" To which Williams replied, "My bad." Apparently it didn't stop there though, and a war of words led to Sloan asking the owner to meet after the game. When Deron requested to join the meeting, Sloan replied, "Do you want me just to quit right now?" And after that game, he did. Sloan resigned after 26 years with the Jazz. Sloan's immediate and emotional departure from the Jazz quickly shifted people's attention to Deron. How toxic could things have gotten to cause Sloan to suddenly call it quits? How much is a star point guard to blame? In situations of internal turmoil, the team will usually side with someone and take action. Keep the player or the coach, and fire or trade the other. Even with Sloan out, the Jazz still parted ways with Deron. 12 days after Sloan's resignation, the Jazz traded Deron to the New Jersey Nets for Devin Harris, Derek Favors, and 2 first-round picks. Although the Nets were a bottom-tier team who missed out on acquiring Carmelo Anthony just 1 day before, they were still an intriguing landing spot for Deron. Then Nets owner Mikhail Prokhorov had just bought the Nets in May 2010 and made his 3 goals very clear. Acquire superstar talent, move the franchise from New Jersey to Brooklyn, and win a championship. Prokhorov brought big talk and deep pockets, and the Nets had the cap room flexibility to sign big free agents. So getting to the Nets had to be a very intriguing option for Deron. The Nets were definitely lacking talent when Deron got there, but he still showed the value he could bring outside of Jerry Sloan's system. He played 12 games with the Nets that season and averaged 15 points and almost 13 assists per game. His shooting numbers took a huge drop, only 35% from the field and 27% from three. Part of that could be attributed to all the attention he got as the number one option on a talent-depleted team, but also due to a wrist injury which caused him to miss 13 games and required off-season surgery. The Nets finished that season 24-58. Deron's first full season with the Nets would be a shortened one due to the NBA lockout. During the lockout, Deron was the first notable NBA star to sign a deal to play overseas. He signed with Besiktas, a team based in Istanbul, Turkey, for what was reported as a $5 million deal. He'd go on to play 15 games, averaging almost 22 points per game and 6 assists per game, including a 50-point game, a Euro Challenge Cup record. By the time he left Turkey and returned to the States for the NBA season, Besiktas even retired his number 8 jersey. Once the lockout ended, Deron returned to the Nets for the shortened season. He played in 55 of the 66 games, averaging a career-high 21 points per game, but only 8.7 assists per game, his lowest since his rookie season. His play was also not translating to wins, as the Nets finished 22-44. Deron shot only 40.7% from the field, which was a career low at that time. Even with the losing he was doing early with the Nets, there's no doubt that Deron was still an elite point guard, maybe even the best point guard, even ahead of his draft class rival, Chris Paul. From 2008 to 2012, Deron and Chris had nearly identical stats, but in their head-to-head matchups, Deron was 13-4 and averaged almost 17 points per game and 8.5 assists per game, while Chris averaged 16 points per game and 9 assists per game. And when it came to playoff stats and success, Deron really elevated his play and his teams performed better than CP3's. In the offseason, the Nets completed their move to Brooklyn, while they moved heaven and earth to get Deron to re-sign with the Nets after he opted out to test free agency. While he was reportedly deciding between the Nets and his hometown Dallas Mavericks, Brooklyn traded with the Atlanta Hawks for All-Star Joe Johnson. With help on the way, Deron signed a 5-year, $98 million deal to return to the Nets. The new-look Nets got out to a hot start at 11-4, but then things completely flipped, and they lost 10 of their next 13 games, enough for the Nets to fire head coach Avery Johnson after a 14-14 record through the first 28 games. Remember, we're only 2 years removed from the drama with Jerry Sloan, so you know where the attention went. Straight to Deron, and that added to the perception that he was a coach killer. His public comments about struggling to adjust to the Nets' offense were received as shots towards Avery Johnson. Shots or not, they definitely had legitimacy. From high school through his Utah years, he played in offenses that were predicated on movement, screens, cuts, ball and player movement. While it's true that hoopers hoop, fitting into a system impacts your production. Deron claimed that the Nets system was more one-on-one iso ball, which was great for his teammate, ISO Joe Johnson, but was not a natural style for Deron. After Avery Johnson's firing, the Nets went 35-19 with interim head coach PJ Carlesimo and finished the season 49-33. As for Deron, he had a solid regular season, averaging just under 19 points per game and 8 assists per game. He was in the lineup, missing only 4 games all season, but let's be real, he was nowhere close to healthy. Back at the beginning of the year, Deron believed he would need off-season surgery on his left ankle after receiving a cortisone shot to lessen inflammation. By February, he was receiving platelet-rich plasma therapy treatment and cortisone shots in both ankles. It was also reported that he'd received at least 8 injections in his ankles since the season started. Reflecting on it, Deron said his ankles felt like, he said, quote, "Listen man, from walking here to the locker room felt like, what do you not understand? Like, I could not walk. I could not walk up my stairs without them killing me. It would take me 10 minutes to get up my stairs sometimes, especially in the morning. I felt like I was just hurting the team even being out there playing the way I was because I couldn't move. I couldn't stay in front of anybody. I couldn't beat anybody off the dribble. I couldn't jump. If I did find some energy to do one move, by the time I did the one move, it hurt so bad that I couldn't even jump to shoot a layup. It was just painful." The Nets made the playoffs as the 4th seed, but would lose in the first round to the Bulls in 7 games. Remember what I said about Nets owner Mikhail Prokhorov and his goal to win a championship? In that offseason, the Nets hired Jason Kidd as head coach, and they swung for the fences by trading for Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, and Jason Terry, hoping that the addition could be a super team kryptonite to the Miami Heat super team that just won back-to-back NBA titles. But there were a few problems. First, it wasn't 2008. Garnett was 37 years old, and Pierce and Terry were 36. Then there was the issue of getting all these current and former stars to play as one under a first-time head coach. And last, injuries. Brook Lopez missed 65 games due to a foot injury. Garnett missed 27 games, and Deron missed 18 games and struggled through various injuries. Deron started the season with a sprained right ankle, and 3 weeks after returning from injury, sprained his left ankle. Once he returned again, he re-injured the left ankle. He'd go on to continue feeling pain in both ankles and undergo more PRP treatments and cortisone shots. Deron averaged only 14 points and 6 assists per game during the regular season, while the Nets finished 44-38. They lose to the Heat in 5 games in the second round of the playoffs, and Deron had off-season surgery on both ankles. The 14-15 season started strong health-wise as Deron played the first 25 games. But the injuries will pile up again and his production would continue to dip. He dealt with various injuries, including his right calf, left side, left rib, and tendonitis. He averaged 13 points and 6.5 assists per game on an abysmal 38.7% shooting from the field. Deron had a couple stints off the bench and scored in single digits 19 times while scoring more than 20 points only 7 times all season. The Nets finished 38-44 but made the playoffs before losing to the Atlanta Hawks in the first round. In July 2015, with 2 years left on his deal, Deron and the Nets agreed to a buyout of $27.3 million, making Deron an unrestricted free agent. Just 4 days later, his next chapter would begin as Deron signed with his hometown Dallas Mavericks for 2 years, $11 million. In Dallas, he proved to still be a solid point guard as he averaged just under 14 points per game and 6 assists per game over the next 2 seasons. But that was far from the Pete D. Will we knew and loved. He was waived by the Mavs in February of 2017. 4 days after his release, he signed with the Cleveland Cavaliers in a last effort to secure a championship. He had some bright spots as a reserve for the rest of the regular season. He even scored 35 points and added 9 assists and 7 rebounds in the game just before the playoffs started. But as the playoffs progressed, his minutes and production both continues to dip. With all of that, Deron still had a chance to add to his legacy as the Cavs advanced to the NBA Finals. After all the pain, all the struggle, all the scrutiny, he could arrive at the pinnacle of NBA success. He could be known as NBA champion Deron Williams. But that couldn't be further from reality, as the finals would leave a bad lasting image in the eyes of many. In the series, Deron scored a total of 5 points on 2 for 16 shooting as the Golden State Warriors beat the Cavs in 5 games. The criticism and disrespect thrown at Deron throughout the series was heavy. Even Samuel L. Jackson jumped in to show his lack of respect for Deron's performance. The 2017 finals would be his last games on an NBA court. I hate that he was such a force when healthy, only to become somewhat of an afterthought at the end of his career. It's probably not a Hall of Fame career. Basketball Reference gives Deron a 9.5% chance of making the Hall of Fame. But even then, his legacy still deserves to be cemented in the era he once dominated as an elite point guard. Here's a breakdown of his career stats. 16.3 points per game, 8.1 assists per game, 3-time All-Star, 2-time All-NBA, 9 playoff appearances, and 6,819 career assists, which ranks 22nd all-time. Nowadays, it looks like Deron loves spending time with his family. He also golfs a lot, and it looks like he's really good too. He also has an ownership stake in Fortis MMA Gym in Dallas, Texas. He's probably remembered most recently for finding his way back into the spotlight when he fought former NFL great Frank Gore in a boxing match. As entertaining as it may have been for us, Deron completely shut down the possibilities of future fights and retired after that match. He also made appearances on several shows such as All the Smoke, Knuckleheads, and The Pat McAfee Show. There's even more details about the life and career of Deron that I didn't include in the video, so I encourage y'all to check those videos out. We see Chris Paul still playing and adding to a Hall of Fame legacy, but you can't help but appreciate his rivalry with Deron at the peak of their careers and imagine simply what could have been if a healthy Deron was still playing too. He may not be remembered in the Hall of Fame, but he should never be forgotten. His NBA legacy lives on.